professores altamente qualificados que discutem, entre outras coisas, o uso de dados espaciais para análise de políticas públicas e envolvendo eleições e outros tópicos. Thank you everyone for being with us this Friday morning. Here I have two of the most active research in the field of politics, election, and geography these days. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation, Professor Matthew and Professor Marcelo. The Casa JOTA initiative brings you in-depth discussions with the country's greatest authorities and important voice of the productive sectors and academia. All this to keep alive a space for technical and in-depth debate on the main public policies in Brazil, and to fulfill our mission, that is to make Brazilian institutions more predictable. Today, as I said, I have two of the most important professors and researchers in this field of spatial analysis. I have from the United States, Professor Matthew. He is professor in the Department of Political Science at the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy. And Professor Marcelo Marchesini is assistant professor and coordinator of the Advanced Public Management program at Insper here in Brazil, to discuss the use of spatial data to produce and to tell us to produce more, how to produce more sophisticated political analysis, and to find stronghold spots, as well as the potential areas to grow support. I was told that this talk today will be a little more informal than the usual. They are going to also show their computers and their softwares and how they do the analysis themselves. We can say that electoral geography has never been more popular than in these days. We see maps, cartograms, and more sophisticated spatial analysis everywhere, from media outlets to government web pages. In fact, spatial analysis seems to be particularly popular nowadays in health research as well, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the use of the spatial data to visualize and discover geographical pattern is much older, isn't it, professors? In fact, the place matters. They are going to show us why and how the place matters for political support and the electoral matters. So I'm going to ask just a general question and open up this conversation with them. So I would like to say, why do people living in different areas vote in different ways? Is it a particular thing from US, from Brazil, from an area, or is it we can see it everywhere?
Okay, so thank you, Daniel, for this very generous introduction. I will get to your question, but first, let me say thank you to JOTA for organizing this debate. And also thank you for Professor Matthew Ingram, my friend and former advisor, for being here with us today, sharing some of his knowledge. So, as I mentioned, I think Daniel's introduction was very generous in presenting spatial data and our research, but our main goal here, as hopefully to become clear, is that these tools are available and are accessible for everyone, are very easily adopted to analyze public policy and politics in general. So if you allow me, I will just share my screen to just 2 slides to motivate our debate, and then I will present some of these tools and maps that can illustrate its potential for policy and politics. So our motivation to be here today is exactly what Danielle mentioned. Maps and infographics are more and more part of our routine in the news and in political analysis. But these tools can seem to be very sophisticated, and they can actually be very sophisticated, but we can also use very basic tools to develop a specific in-depth analysis of a specific phenomenon, being a political phenomenon or a policy analysis. So for our webinar today, we will illustrate these with 2 cases. I will present some examples of electoral dispute in Brazil in 2016. Specifically, I will show some results for São Paulo City Council, so vereadores elected in São Paulo in 2016 in different electoral zones in São Paulo. And Professor Ingram will present some data from the United States, specifically from one of the key states in which Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in that election. And we will try to explore how this information can be useful for the current election, both in São Paulo and in the US. We will use one of these very easy, friendly tools for spatial analysis, which is this software, an open software, JOTA. And after presenting these examples, we will have some final questions, and also we'll be happy to answer any questions that come from the audience. Also, I should mention that Professor Ingram and I, we have a online course on spatial data for those that are interested in using these tools. So we will present the examples, but we don't have time to go into the basics or the operation to develop these maps. But we do have an online course for those that are interested.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Is it already online, or will start soon?
So this course will start at the end of November. It's open for enrollment right now, but we will start at the end of November, and it will be 5 meetings between the end of November and early December.
Cool.
Okay, so let me now show you some possibilities using this software, JOTA. What I have here on JOTA, it's the electoral zones in São Paulo. So this is an example of a shapefile for those that have no knowledge at all in spatial data. There are different shapefiles available online for different levels of analysis. These are electoral zones in the city of São Paulo. We have districts in the city of São Paulo. We have municipalities in the state of São Paulo. We have states in Brazil, municipalities in Brazil, and so far and so on. So there are multiple shapefiles that are open for you to download in whatever you are in your organization or for personal use. And with a tool like JOTA, we can have different strategies for visualizing this basic tool. So here we have the city of São Paulo plotted in a more friendly environment. But what really matters for us here is to explore some of the data from the last election for city council. So what I did here is that I merged this shapefile with data from votes that all the elected city councilors had, and the most voted also non-elected candidates had in the last election. And these votes are divided into these units of analysis, our lines here, which are the electoral zones in São Paulo. So with this data that was very easy to collect, we can first answer one basic question, which is a major tool for those that are running for re-election, so that already have a tracking for their votes, which is, where are my votes? So where do I have votes? And based on this first question, there are several following questions. So where should I focus my campaign? Where can I gain more votes? But the first question would be, where are my current votes? So there are different strategies for visualizing this. I will just show one of them, that are the quantile maps. I will have votes divided in 5 groups here. I will present first results for the candidate that had most votes in the last election, Eduardo Suplicy. So Eduardo Suplicy, as certainly many of you know, was a former senator, is a very well-known politician in São Paulo. So his votes are very spread all across the town. So in different areas in the city of São Paulo, he was very well voted in all areas, but we see that these darker areas, which are the areas where he had most votes, are spread in the west of São Paulo, north, center, and also in the south. So basically all areas in São Paulo.
For those who don't know São Paulo, spatiality, those areas that he received more votes was, would say, more wealthy areas, or more suburban, poor?
So yeah, that's a good question, because that's exactly the kind of thing that we can infer from this map, is that he was well voted in all these areas. So he is not depending on the wealth of the electoral zone. Here, for instance, we have some areas in the far east of São Paulo, which are basically more deprived areas with less basic income, and also some very central zones, and in the west of São Paulo, where income is very high and education, so prosperity in general is higher in this area, and he was well voted in all of these areas. We can also see that the few areas where he had least votes, which are still, we will see later, that still we can see here that the electoral zone where he had the least votes, he had more than 2,000. This is a lot compared to other candidates. So he was really well voted in all areas. But we can then compare Suplicy's voting distribution with other candidates. So for instance,
Marcelo, could I jump in here?
Please, Matt.
Yeah, just to build on something, on Danielle's question, right, about asking sort of what might be some of the drivers of these votes. And I liked your explanation, right, that they seem to be distributed across the city without much connection to socioeconomic background. But this is one of the really appealing things of spatial analysis and of being able to connect non-spatial data like the voting data to a spatial format like the shapefile. There are lots of other formats for spatial data. But regardless of the context, here we're looking at Sao Paulo, right? But regardless of the context, visualizing your data this way allows you to connect the data to any intuitive background knowledge you might have about the underlying geography, right? So people watching this webinar right now might have varying degrees of familiarity with the geography of Sao Paulo, right? Or the socioeconomic, the distribution of socioeconomic or demographic or political factors. Certainly I'm on the low end of that knowledge, right? But Marcelo's on the high end of that knowledge. And so any naive observer coming to data, if you look at it on a table, right, like in an Excel spreadsheet or on a piece of paper, right, just in columns and rows, you might not be able to gain some insights. But as soon as it's visualized, as soon as it's connected to a spatial format like this, now you can connect all of your background knowledge about geography of the location to the data. And I think even that step is often skipped over in many discussions of spatial analysis, but it's a really valuable step of just connecting non-spatial data to a spatial format and allowing you to draw on those intuitions that we've been building up since, you know, primary school, right? About learning about the geography of our countries, or if you're a resident of Sao Paulo, you've developed a familiarity with different locations in Sao Paulo over the course of your lifetime. And now you can draw on all of that background knowledge as you try to interpret and make some inferences about why your data, in this case electoral data, are distributed geographically in a particular pattern.
No, exactly. Thank you, Matt, for this clarification. I think you're absolutely right. So connecting non-spatial data with a spatial format has great value. I think this is one of our key motivations here. But then just to add a new layer here, we can, based on visualizing one specific phenomenon in space, we can start comparing these with other phenomena in space. So we can compare here now Suplicy's votes with the second most voted candidate in the last election for city council, which was Milton Leite. And we have a very different distribution. Let me show them side by side. You can see now that Milton Leite has a huge concentration of his votes in the south of São Paulo. So all of these electoral zones in the south area of São Paulo are voting heavily for Milton Leite. We can see that the electoral zone that gave the most votes for Milton Leite gave him more than 33,000 votes. This is 3 times the number that Eduardo Suplicy had in his most voted electoral zone. But on the other hand, we can also see that Milton Leite had only 20 votes in one of his least voted electoral zones. While, as I mentioned before, Eduardo Suplicy had more than 2,000 in his least voted. So we can see that these are 2 absolutely different types of political strategies or political campaigns, at least reflected in the voting for these 2 candidates. We have one candidate that is very well known all around the city, so he has his votes all around the city, and another whose votes are very concentrated in one specific area. So for Milton Leite, the campaign is basically the south of São Paulo. He already had a very powerful voting here in the last election. So for me, for instance, that I live in a more central area in São Paulo, I can barely see any signs of Milton Leite during an electoral campaign. Probably this is very different for someone who lives in the south of São Paulo. So this is first
so we can
yeah,
sorry,
go ahead, Daniel.
We can say from this view that he dominates those neighborhood or electoral zone districts or precincts.
Yeah, so we could develop several other observations here. We could, for instance, select these electoral zones with this tool.
Wow, nice. Oh.
And then we can go back to the table and see here, we can move all this selected to the top and see which are these electoral zones. They are here. These are the number of the electoral zones. And then we can identify in each of these electoral zones if there is another candidate that was
as good as him.
As good as Milton Leite, exactly. So we can see that these are the most voted, like it's placed in the order of votes. So really no one gets close to Milton Leite in these areas, except for one of other areas. Like for instance, we have one case here where he has only a few votes in neighborhoods in the south. So this might be one interesting case to analyze. Well, we are here talking about this electoral zone here that I selected by mistake. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's correct. Our selection correctly found one unit that should not be in that list.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. So these are just some examples of what we can do. So just playing with this open software. So just to explore a little bit further some of the other possibilities before handling to Professor Ingram, I will show you a different kind of map. So before that, let me just add two more candidates here, because here we have two very different candidates. But there are also cases where candidates have a very similar voting result. So for instance, I already played a lot with this data, but we have here, for instance, voting for Vereadora Soninha and votes for Vereador Caio Miranda. So now we can see that these are very similar. These are two candidates from different parties that they were well voted basically in the same areas, again in the darker colors, and they had few votes also in the same areas in the lighter colors. Go ahead, Daniel.
But they are from different parts, but within the same side, for example, left or right or conservative, liberal?
So yeah, that's a very, very interesting question.
Because they look like they're the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So they do have, apparently, at least on a first glance, a very similar agenda. So they are moderates. They are from more center-left parties, but clearly differentiating themselves from the most leftist candidates. So they appeal for basically the same public. So these two candidates, they are fighting for the same public, for the same audience, same electors. So this is also an important information for them to take into account during the campaign. So just to show you one last example, and then Professor Ingram will jump in. There is one other very powerful tool here that requires one additional very important concept in spatial analysis, which is establishing how the different units are connected, meaning the spatial dependence between these units. But with this, we can create cluster maps. So again, let's take these two candidates. So Caio Miranda, so he has very similar votes apparently than Soninha, but he can analyze this map. So what should be his best strategy? So with this map, this cluster map, he will have the indication of, in red, the electoral zones where he concentrates most of his votes, and these are like the core of a cluster with high votes. So these are very priority areas for him to sustain his campaign. So these are the basic units that will guarantee his votes. Go ahead.
We call in Brazil reduto eleitoral or curral eleitoral, something like this.
Yeah, so you could think about this in this way, but I would say that these are, should be the headquarters of his campaign, should be the areas where he should, have committees, have street campaigns very strongly to guarantee these votes. Also, we have here in these dark blue areas, the electoral zones where he had very few votes. So here we are talking about statistically less votes than we would expect randomly. So if we get all his votes and distribute randomly across the city, these electoral zones in blue would have less votes than we would expect. The ones in red would have more than we would expect. But then we also have one very interesting case here, which is this light blue area. So this light blue area, and again, we can just select here and go back to the table and see that this is electoral zone 351. Here, he had very few votes, less than would be expected randomly, but in an area that is close to where he was very well voted. So basically, this is signalizing, this is indicating that something went wrong in his electoral campaign in this area. He could have been much better here than he actually did. So this is an area where he should change something. His campaign now in 2020 should be somehow different than it was in 2016 in this specific electoral zone here. So this is one example with this it's called LISA cluster maps on how to identify priority areas for campaign. So one last thing.
Marcelo, could I step in? I'm going to show some of these cluster maps as well. So I just wanted to note that there are a lot of technical details behind how these maps are generated. We don't want to spend time on those technical details here, but that's something that we could cover in the class that Marcelo mentioned, with more time. But these red zones are areas that some people refer to as hotspots, in cluster analysis or hotspot analysis. Briefly, they are areas where the variable of interest here, vote, is higher than average, and the surrounding areas are also higher than average, and that association is statistically meaningful. And so the purple unit that Marcelo was just pointing out is interesting for a lot of reasons, but in spatial analysis, these units are known as spatial outliers, because there tends to be a dissimilarity in the association, As Marcelo was mentioning, there's a low vote, so the vote there is lower than average, yet the unit is surrounded by other units where the vote is higher than average. right? So it's that dissimilarity, that outlier, the spatial outlier status that's interesting from an analytic perspective.
Yeah. So this is not a simple different way to represent the same data that we see here. We're not only representing this in different colors. This is indicating you see some of the electoral zones that in this map are dark. Here they are not statistically significant. So here are really the ones that are statistically having more votes than we would expect randomly, and that are surrounded by areas with more votes that we would expect randomly. So these maps are really powerful. And again, just we are discussing here electoral results, but these maps can be used for different policy purposes. For instance, Professor Ingram works a lot, and I did some work with him on homicide data. So if we are analyzing crime or homicides, and we identify one unit like this one that it's placed in a region with high levels of crime or homicide, but it's being able to protect itself from this. We really want to know what's going on there. We really want to investigate if this is due to schools or a specific nonprofit that is working in this area, a specific policy initiative or political or policy or initiative that is working in this area. So this would be really powerful for further investigations. So I think I will.
Could I jump in again, just Marcelo, because these are interesting points, and I think the points might be of interest to a broader range of audiences, right? That sometimes these purple units, and sometimes you also find a unit that in this kind of visualization would be colored maybe pink, where the value is higher than average, but the surrounding units are lower than average. Again, it's the dissimilarity that's interesting. And some analysts refer to these units as barrier units, right? Because whatever similarity seemed to be associated in the red units or the blue units is not spreading or transferring to that purple unit or the pink unit. So there's all kinds of insights and motivations that flow from that, right? Because now you might do some qualitative work at the boundary of those units to try to better understand why the phenomenon is not spreading or transferring or associating in a similar way, right? For instance, in crime studies, you might find that there's a long green space or a large park or a river or maybe a garbage dump, right? That prevents people from going back and forth, prevents maybe people from disrupts mobility or disrupts communication or social interaction in some way. So these kinds of visualizations have really interesting insights for mixed methods research, for qualitative research, for connecting these spatial visualizations to other forms of analysis.
And I believe in some areas you can have this like invisible boundaries, right? That is dictate for like a parastatal organization, right? They can say that they can prevent you to cross one particular neighborhood or streets to get access to public equipments or even like other public benefits or equipments. It's very interesting to see how this is placed and help us to explore and understand, discover patterns, right? It's very interesting. And then Great. From here you can add layers and try to make some like statistical inference to try to explain, right, why you see these colors the way you see, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I will take this comment to just explain, make it clear that we are only presenting very, very basic tools that, as we hopefully are showing, are already very powerful for analysis. But spatial analysis go much further, and we can do, work with spatial econometrics and identify causalities and different other mechanisms here. But just to end my example, and then Matt will present some examples from the US. Everything that I was explaining here or showing is based on previous votes. So I was just using results from the last election, which can absolutely and should be used for candidates that are running for re-election. But someone might ask, so if I'm running for the first time, how can spatial data be useful for me? And I would answer that first, knowing how people vote for the other candidates is extremely useful for you to identify first areas where where people are voting for candidates with a similar agenda than the one that you are suggesting, that you are trying to promote, and also
to steal his vote.
Exactly, to try to convince people in a better way that you're a better candidate. But also, as I mentioned, also at the very beginning, you can add more data to this data set. If you have, for instance, a list of supporters in different neighborhoods, you can add this your list of supporters and then see where they are placed and try to prioritize these areas. You can add information from, for instance, parks in different areas of the city. If your strategy is trying to promote environmental policy, and then do your campaign based on on parks and things like that. So multiple strategies that can be used using this spatial data. So, but I think I already spoke too much, and I would like to hear a little bit of Professor Ingram, please.
Thank you.
After working on Zoom for so much, I still forget to unmute myself sometimes. Thank you, Marcelo. And I want to reiterate also, again, thanks to Danielle and to JOTA and Insper for the partnership. I'm going to jump right into some of the data, and then I see we're already at close to 10:45. So I'll try to move a little bit more quickly so we have time for some questions at the end. So here we have our same software. Can everybody see a slide in the background and then the software moving, the same software that Marcelo was using?
Yes.
Great. So I've already loaded some data, and I'm just going to load a similar kind of quantile map, right? Split into 5 categories. And what we're looking at here.
So Matt, we can only see your presentation at this point. At least I cannot see your maps.
You cannot see the map?
No, I think it is behind, right?
Let me stop sharing and I'll share the map now.
Yeah,
now you can see it?
Yeah.
Great. So what we're looking at here is a map of Michigan, one of the battleground, right? One of the key states in the northern United States. So one of the nice things about JOTA, I'm just demonstrating some of the other utilities, right? We can add some background, right? So you can clearly see what you're looking at. I'm just going to change the transparency here a little bit so that we can see some of the data a little bit better. Again, as Marcelo was saying, these are some fundamental, also very basic tools, right? There's a wide range of more complex or sophisticated tools in spatial analysis, but we wanted to emphasize for applied purposes, right? For policy analysts, journalists, people working at think tanks or nonprofits, media outlets. There's a set of free, very accessible tools with which you can link spatial and non-spatial data and generate some really interesting results that can provoke some compelling insights. So here again, we're looking at Michigan. Michigan is a big state, right? It was won in 2016 by less than 10,000 votes by President Trump, right? And was one of these consequential 4 states, right? Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and I'm forgetting off the top of my head the other one, Ohio perhaps. But Michigan was won by a very narrow margin. And one of the things that people have focused on is the city of Detroit, which you can see down here in the lower left. I'm just going to zoom in here.
Mm-hmm.
And in the city of Detroit, it's the largest urban center in Michigan, right? It has maybe 750,000 people. It's a majority minority city, so 75% African American population. And you would expect this to be a stronghold of Hillary Clinton, right? So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit closer here to the city. And now I'm just going to generate another map showing the Trump vote in Detroit. Whoops. Can you still see it here?
Yeah. It became darker.
And if we look at them side by side,
so every polygon, like a small polygon, is a precinct.
Every little polygon is a precinct, and I think I've got them roughly the same there. You know, I could add that base map here just to make them a little bit more comparable. But the basic idea, maybe I should remove this base map just so we can look at the data more cleanly. But the basic point here is that the darker colors show greater numbers of votes, right? So on the left, you have the vote for Hillary Clinton. And on the right, in the city of Detroit, you see you have several units where President Trump received 0 votes, right? Again, in the city that is 75% African American. But there's lots of polygons within the city of Detroit where Clinton also received, single-digit votes. So these are interesting, right? You're showing a Democratic stronghold in a battleground state where one candidate is clearly receiving more votes as expected than the conservative candidate. But even the progressive, right, Democratic candidate is not receiving as many votes as you might expect, right? There are lost opportunities there as well. This data at the precinct level has some limitations because we don't have population numbers, so we can't really compare the units to each other in a meaningful way, right? Ideally, we'd like to divide the number of votes by the total population in the precinct or the voting age better population in the precinct to get a sense of the rate of participation. So what I did was I aggregated these, sorry, the screen sharing just stopped suddenly. I'm not sure why. Let me try again.
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, I have an interruption here. Give me just
all right. That's okay. She can present together, maybe.
Okay, I bribed her with my phone. You can still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we should now be looking at a new map of county level units. Can you see that? A green map?
Yeah, green one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what I did was I aggregated this data to a higher level of analysis. Instead of looking at 4,000 precincts, we're just looking at about 80 counties in Michigan. And let's just look at the same, at now some more meaningful data. The Democratic vote divided as a percent of the voting age population. Can you see this now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The shades of brown?
No, we are still
the green.
in the green.
It just blinked. Yeah.
Now you can see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just stopping the sharing and then starting again. But here you can see as a percentage of the voting age population, the Hillary Clinton's vote is concentrated. Yes, Chiquita. Dame tiempo, por favor. And I'm going to generate one more here so we can see the same thing. Can you see now a second map for Donald Trump?
I think we're still in the first one.
How did you get it so that you could show two maps? All right.
That's a puzzle, huh?
Well, Marcelo was able to do it, but let me see. This is now the Donald Trump map, and you should see more of a concentration up here in the northern part of the state.
Yes, we see that.
Yeah.
And so
this is not Detroit. So what's the main city in this area?
This is all the state of Michigan. Detroit is down here. But
do we also have a big city in the north, or is it more rural areas?
It's more rural.
Okay.
So I'm going to generate just a couple of other maps quickly, and hopefully you can see them all.
Yeah, those information, like extra information or other layers, as rural, more urban, more racial concentration, etc. It's help to explain the voting pattern, right? I mean, everywhere here in Brazil as well, they say this north-south divide and
right. Can you see the cluster map now, the red and blue map?
No, not yet.
Okay.
It's the oldest.
But yes, Daniel, I think we could develop different kinds of causal explanations with this data set. This is not what we are trying to do here, but it is a possibility, to try to explain these causal mechanisms.
Yeah, exactly. You could do that, right? That there's some rural interests that might be more appealing. We understand this in the United States that are generally more appealing to the Republican Party, and urban interests for a variety of reasons. The socioeconomic demographic factors combine in different ways depending on rurality and urbanity. But you should be looking at a map now that shows sort of the map of the entire state of Michigan with some red units towards the bottom right.
Yeah.
And this is the county that contains the city of Detroit.
Okay.
So you can see that these red units are those same hotspots, right? Those high clusters, the units where there's a lot of votes for Hillary Clinton as a percentage of the voting age population, surrounded by other units where Hillary Clinton is doing well, but she's not doing well up in these blue units, right? Conversely, if we look at a similar map for Donald Trump, we can see that the pattern is very different, right? You should be seeing a map now of the state of Michigan where his votes are concentrated up in that northern area of the main section of the state, right? And so you see these different spatial distributions of his votes, right? And where his maybe base or his corral, as you were saying, right, is is concentrated. Then I wanted to just do one more map, and I'll stop here to show something else that is interesting that can help analyze maybe lost opportunities or where there's an opportunity to grow, as Marcelo was analyzing before. And can folks see this map?
Not yet.
No, it's the old one.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll make it work. We'll make it work here. Can you see now a series of maps?
Mm-hmm.
So what you're seeing here is something that in JOTA is called a conditional map or a conditional plot in a map form. And there are there's a horizontal x-axis, which is now capturing abstention, or the percent of the voting population that is not voting.
Okay.
And you see that it ranges from around 30%, right? 0.3 on the left, to almost half of the population, right? 45, 46%, 0.45, 0.46 of the population on the right.
Mm-hmm.
So the column on the right shows the maps of the state of Michigan, where about 45% of the population in these counties did not vote, right? Did not participate in the 2016 election. On the vertical axis, we're seeing the percent of the voting population that voted for Hillary Clinton, for the Democratic candidate. So the top row identifies places where support for the Democratic candidate for Clinton was strongest, right? Again, we can focus on the city of Detroit, right? I've just highlighted here. We could remove all of the highlights, but I'm just going to highlight the city of Detroit, the county of Detroit here, because it's at the top right corner of the plot that I just mentioned, where there was a high level of abstention, right? 45, 46% of the voting population did not vote. The percent, the people who did vote voted heavily for Hillary Clinton. So there is a large amount of lost voters, right? For some reason, in this Democratic stronghold, people did not turn out for Hillary Clinton.
And how do you interpret this?
Well, some of it is can be attributed to suppression, right? There's a lot of voter intimidation, suppression, disinformation. Some of it may have been disillusionment with Hillary Clinton as a candidate in a post-Obama era, right? After the first African-American president, having a traditional white candidate, maybe that was not as close to their interests. African-American turnout in the United States dropped a lot in 2016 compared to 2008 and 2012. But as a general voting bloc, that's the base of the Democratic Party, right? 90+% of African-American voters support the Democratic Party. So here in this county, which is the most populous county in the state, right? By far, the Democratic candidate lost, 45% of its potential, right? And again, Trump won the entire state by less than 10,000 votes, where there's strong signs that there were, maybe 100,000 votes available here. Right? So this is just, again, one more example, one more illustration of how you can use some maps and some visualizations and some of the basic but still very compelling techniques of spatial analysis to generate some insights and intuitions, whatever your phenomenon of interest. Right here we're talking about elections, but as Marcelo mentioned before, you could be thinking about public health, about public security, economics, policy analysis, etc. But I'll stop there.
Sure. So if she could know it beforehand, before it happened, it could mean something, right? Because maybe it was a case of like stretching a little bit more conversation with people, or step by more often in the county, or I don't know what political strategy could be developed there, but very interesting. So you can only see afterwards, but it's very interesting as well.
Yeah, and with more time, we could develop some more fine-grained analysis, right? We could look at a larger set of social, demographic, economic factors, right, that drive participation or that depress participation. We could collect updated data right through this year or last year on the current precincts or counties, and then try to generate some predictions, right, or anticipations of where to dedicate or invest your resources, say in this instance in a political campaign, but it could be any policy area or research area of interest. And then again, we haven't touched on any of the more complex or sophisticated modeling approaches, right, that are part of the spatial analysis toolkit, right? So with those sorts of modeling enterprises, you could generate some other kinds of forecasts or predictions. I think a lot of people are hesitant to enter into the business of predictions these days with elections.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
there's a
probably.
wide range of tools out there, right? And
We at JOTA, we like prediction. We like to to anticipate things, right? That's
right.
our business and what we do every day. So that's really interesting and very in-depth view of how we can apply those tools to discover and also to instigate our minds and find the insights to even like as a journalist, reporters, etc. You can use those tools to make more impactful stories about politics or elections or disease, etc. Right? And
yeah, absolutely. I sorry, Daniel, just to
no, go ahead.
You mentioned the use for journalists, and as we mentioned at the beginning, it's becoming more and more popular. But still there is a huge potential for further in-depth analysis on. We also at Insper, we are very aligned with JOTA with this purpose to promote better use of evidence for public policy, and even I agree with you that the media, non-profits, civil society in general also should use and benefit from these tools for orienting their action.
Well, I have a question from here that basically is where you can find those data, right? Where and how you can start doing this kind of analysis, right? I mean, is there a repository or online resource or?
So I will speak a little bit about Brazil. Matt can jump in whenever he wants. This is spread in different places. There are several repositories. Even the public government databases, they are already they promote and they have shape files available, which are these basic files for spatial analysis. And then you can merge different kinds of data sets into this shape file. You can merge whatever you have in mind, if you are interested in schools or health or public security. If you have all this data, the only thing that you have to be aware is to have them into the same unity of analysis, meaning districts or municipalities. If you have them in the same unit of analysis, you can merge different data sets and build whatever is meaningful or useful for you. So where can you get this first files, the shape files? If you just Google shape files for municipalities in São Paulo or states in Brazil, you will certainly be directed to some different repositories where you can get the shape files.
Right.
Well, I don't know if Matt has some suggestion or a more concentrated website or something where you can get different kinds of shape files, Matt.
If you want. Well, I have 3 questions here from the YouTube watchers. But Matt, if you want to add, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would just echo the same thing that Marcelo said. In the United States, globally, there's a wide range of spatial and non-spatial data, right? One of the most common things that people tend to do is to seek out the census, whatever the National Institute of Statistics is, right? IBGE in Brazil, the census in the United States. And increasingly, there are spatial formats available, right? We've discussed the shape files, but there's a wide range of other formats, and increasingly a wide range of different administrative units, organizations are making these shape files available, or making these spatial formats available. And it's relatively straightforward to merge a spatial format, right, with the non-spatial data, like a traditional rectangular data set. That's one of the things that we would cover, say, in the course, right? One of the sort of introductory things that we would cover in the course. I just posted the link in the chat to the course. The other thing that I was going to share is just the link to the. I'm just sharing my screen, which is the link to the JOTA site, right? And so the JOTA was developed in part by Luke Anselin, who is now at the University of Chicago. And there are other data if folks wanted to play with some data, download the software and then play with some data in JOTA. There are data sets available through the JOTA site, right, where you could develop some familiarity, sort of learn what the basic steps are, and then use that familiarity to go out and look for your own data sets. But again, those are steps that we would cover in the course at Insper starting at the end of next month.
Right. Well, I have a question from Ricardo Gonçalves. He posted on YouTube. And why does it seems so hard to see the methods being used in political science, especially here in Brazil? Maybe, I don't know if Marcelo can take it and Matthew can add something. I don't know.
Yeah, so
yeah,
I think
ahead.
It's becoming more and more popular. It may be still rare to see spatial analysis, but it's becoming popular. I think you're correct that it's at this point. My impression is that it's being more popular in the news than in the academia. But it's a powerful tool. I would bet that in the following years, this will become part of the course in several areas, not only in geography, but in political science, health studies, public policy in general, because it's really very powerful for decision making and and the academic journals also are starting to acknowledge this. I see positively that this is gaining the space, but we are still a little behind if we compare to international scholars.
Was the question about political science or policy in general, or policy in Brazil?
Yeah. Yeah, they say, yeah, he said like in general, don't pinpoint any specific area, just political science as a discipline, I would say. But he put another one to support, like if you agree that the method is underused here in Brazil, I would say that's I'm interpreting. And if you have any hypothesis about why is that? Like,
yeah, I'd say generally it's underused everywhere. Political science and policy studies, public administration were slower than some disciplines to take up the method. I mean, it's been rising a lot in its use, as Marcelo said, in the last 10, 15 years. But we were certainly behind some other disciplines like sociology or demography. But we were ahead in some ways of other disciplines as well, right? Economics is perhaps even slower to pick it up. One of the key reasons why I think that it should be used more frequently is that it ties in very nicely, well, a theoretical reason and a methodological reason. The theoretical reason is that lots of people are interested in notions about diffusion, right? Why something spreads from place A to place B, right? What is this idea? There's lots of ideas about this, right? Or different ways of talking about this: spillovers, transfers, contagion. But any sort of argument that contains some sort of notion of diffusion or spread should find spatial analysis very appealing, right? Because it's inherent, right? It's an intrinsic part of the method to understand how one unit is connected to another, right? From a methodological perspective, also a lot of standard statistical approaches assume that units are independent of each other, right? In the traditional sort of bread and butter method of sort of linear regression, right? One of the core assumptions is that the units are independent of each other, right? Or that IID assumption.
yeah.
We don't want to get into too technical a discussion here. But that assumption underlies a lot of traditional econometrics and statistical analysis, right? This unit independence. But units are, that is not realistic in many ways, right? What happens in place A does influence what happens in place B, right? And so spatial analysis takes that into account, and so in some ways should be methodologically and intellectually more satisfying. I think one of the reasons that it might not be taken up as much these days is that there's a lot of emphasis recently in the last 10, 15 years on causal identification, right? So the randomized control trials, right? A typical experiment as being a kind of gold standard for understanding causation, and a lot of techniques or research designs that emphasize causation tend to assume that units are also not interfering with each other, right? That there is a stable unit treatment value, right? The treatment effect is the same across all units, and there isn't any sort of influence from one unit to another. Well, that is at odds with spatial dependence, right? Or the idea that units are connected and influence each other. So that requires some intellectual work, right, to try to reason through that. But I think there's the heavy emphasis on causal identification in a lot of disciplines, principally in economics, but increasingly in a lot of other social and behavioral sciences, is in some ways antithetical, right, to treating dependence more systematically as a core focus of analysis.
I have lots of questions from here, and but we are already passing our threshold time. So if you instead of making new ones, maybe you can just add up like finishing thoughts and about about the use of data if you want, and then we can close the webinar. Oh.
I just would like to thank one more time JOTA for this opportunity. It's nice to talk. I hope people find it interesting to learn a little about spatial analysis. Again, we were addressing people with no knowledge at all or very limited knowledge on spatial analysis. There's a huge potential for these tools, but our goal here was to show how this can be useful for those who have no knowledge or very little knowledge on spatial analysis. We presented some data with very basic tools. And for those who are interested, again, we do have an online course on spatial analysis starting at the end of November. Please refer to the Insper website if you want more information.
And the link was posted on YouTube comments as well.
Oh, excellent. Okay,
so
thank you very much.
Can find from there.
Perfect.
Great.
That's it. Thank you,
Yes.
and thank you, Matt, for agreeing on participating. It was very nice talking to you. And thank you, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Marcelo. Thank you, JOTA and Insper too.
Thank you, Professor Marcelo. Thank you, Professor Matthew. We are very excited with this talk and the possibilities of using those tools to try to understand a little bit more our reality and the next election in the US, also the municipal election in Brazil, and hope we can see we can talk again later on and see this unfolding. And thank you for sharing your tools and insights from using this kind of analysis. So